Based on a true story, The Farmer Who Hunted Tanks from the Sky, September 20th, 1944. The skies over Arracourt, France, are thick with fog. Below, German Panther tanks, some of the deadliest armored vehicles ever built, are smashing through American positions. Men are dying. Units are being overrun. And somewhere above this chaos, a small fabric-covered plane, no bigger than a family car, circles through the mist, armed with 6 rocket launchers strapped to its wings. The pilot's name is Charles Carpenter, a history teacher from rural Illinois, a farmer's son who lost everything in the Great Depression. And on this day, he's about to do something that military planners said was impossible: hunt German tanks from the sky in an unarmed observation plane. They called him Bazooka Charlie, the Mad Major, the Lucky Major. And before the war ended, he would destroy more enemy armor from a Piper Cub than most fighter pilots could dream of. This is his story, a story of American ingenuity, reckless courage, and one man's refusal to accept the rules of war. August 29th, 1912, Edgington, Illinois, a tiny farming community where everyone knows everyone, and the rhythm of life follows the seasons. Charles Carpenter was born here, one of 6 children, into a world where hard work was the only currency that mattered. His father, Frederick, worked the land. His mother, Lois, kept the family together. Life was simple, predictable, measured in harvests and harsh winters. Young Charles grew up with dirt under his fingernails and dreams bigger than the cornfields that surrounded his home. But then came 1929. The stock market crashed and the Great Depression swept across America like a plague. Banks failed. Businesses collapsed, and farms, thousands of farms, were foreclosed and seized. The Carpenter family farm was one of them. Everything they had built, everything they had worked for, gone. The family relocated to Reynolds, near Edgington. But the scars of that loss ran deep. Charles was 17 years old, and he had just learned a brutal lesson. Sometimes the world takes everything from you, and you have to find a way to fight back. But Charles had something going for him: intelligence and determination. He earned scholarships to Roosevelt Military Academy in Aledo, Illinois, and later to Center College in Danville, Kentucky. He wasn't content to let the Depression define him. He studied. He excelled. He transformed himself from a farm boy into an educated man. By the late 1930s, Charles Carpenter had found his calling, teaching history at Moline High School in Illinois. He married Elda Mae Fritchell on July 3, 1940. Life was good again, stable. He had a wife, a career, a future. And then on December 7th, 1941, everything changed. Pearl Harbor was attacked, and America went to war. Charles Carpenter was nearly 30 years old, older than most recruits, but he didn't hesitate. The farm boy turned teacher felt that same pull that millions of American men felt: duty country, the need to stand up when darkness threatened to swallow the world. He enlisted in the United States Army in 1942, not to fight in the mud with the infantry, but to fly, to soar above the battlefields, and become something he had only imagined as a boy looking up at the Illinois sky. After flight training, Second Lieutenant Charles Carpenter was commissioned as an observation pilot. In June 1944, he arrived in France, assigned to General George S. Patton's legendary Third Army, specifically the 4th Armored Division. His aircraft? The L-4 Grasshopper, the military version of the civilian Piper J-3 Cub. Picture this: a tiny high-wing monoplane, fabric-covered, completely unarmored, with a top speed of barely 85 miles per hour. It had room for 2 people, barely, and was powered by a 65-horsepower engine that made about as much noise as a lawnmower. This was not a fighter plane. This was not even close to a combat aircraft. The L-4 was designed for one purpose: reconnaissance. flying low and slow over enemy territory, spotting enemy positions, directing artillery fire, and getting the hell out before German anti-aircraft guns could track you. It was a job that required steady nerves and ice-cold composure. Of the hundreds of L-4 pilots who flew with the First Army under General Omar Bradley, 49 had already been shot down by the time Carpenter arrived in France. These little planes were fragile, slow, and completely defenseless. But Charles Carpenter looked at his L-4 and saw something different. He didn't see a defenseless observation plane. He saw potential. He saw a weapon. You see, Carpenter had noticed something during his reconnaissance flights. German tanks were everywhere: Panzers, Panthers, Tiger tanks, massive, terrifying steel monsters that could crush American infantry positions with impunity. And when these tanks appeared, American forces had limited options: call in artillery, pray for air support, or use a bazooka. The bazooka, a crude but effective rocket launcher that infantry could carry. It fired a 2.36-inch rocket-propelled grenade capable of penetrating 3 inches of armor, enough to disable most tanks if you hit them in the right spot. The problem? You had to be close, dangerously close, close enough that the tank crew could see you, shoot you, run you over. Carpenter had an idea. What if you could fire a bazooka from above, from an angle that tanks couldn't defend against? What if you could turn a harmless observation plane into a tank killer? By late summer 1944, Allied forces were besieging the French city of Lorient, surrounding German units and cutting off their supply lines. Carpenter was flying reconnaissance missions daily, watching German forces dig in, watching enemy tanks move into defensive positions, and it drove him crazy that he couldn't do anything about it. Allied artillery was often out of range. Fighter bombers were tied up supporting other operations, and Carpenter was just supposed to watch. He had heard rumors that other L-4 pilots had experimented with mounting bazookas on their planes. It sounded insane. It probably was insane, but Carpenter got approval from command headquarters to try it. With the help of an ordnance technician and a crew chief, Carpenter mounted 2 M1A, one bazookas, to the wing struts of his L-4. He wired them into the cockpit with electrical switches so he could fire them while flying. Each bazooka held a single rocket-propelled anti-tank grenade. He tested the setup. It worked, so he added 2 more bazookas, then 2 more. Eventually, his L-4 carried 6 bazookas, 3 per side, pointed forward at a slight downward angle. He named his plane Rosie the Rocketer, a play on the famous Rosie the Riveter poster. His aircraft's serial number was 43-30426, and it was about to become one of the most famous planes of World War II. The modification was crude but brilliant. Carpenter's L-4 could now carry 6 anti-tank rockets. The warheads could pierce approximately 3 inches of armor when fired at a 30-degree angle. That was enough to crack open the top armor of most German tanks, even the fearsome Tiger WWII, whose top armor was only about 44 millimeters thick. Carpenter's strategy was simple but required nerves of steel. Locate enemy tanks from the air, dive low, fire all 6 rockets, and get out before German anti-aircraft fire could catch him. Speed, surprise, aggression. The same qualities that had helped him survive the Depression. He flew solo on most missions because any additional weight affected the plane's maneuverability. The L-4 had a cargo capacity of only 232 pounds, including the pilot. Add 6 bazookas and there wasn't room for much else. Within weeks of his first armed missions, Carpenter's reputation began to spread. He had knocked out a German armored car, then a tank, then 2 tanks. American troops on the ground started talking about the crazy pilot in the tiny plane who hunted panzers like a hawk hunting mice. The Associated Press heard about him. Stars and Stripes wrote stories. Newspapers back home ran headlines about Bazooka Charlie, the teacher from Illinois who was terrorizing German tank crews. Carpenter told one reporter, "Some people around here think I'm nuts, but I just believe that if we're going to fight a war, we have to get on with it 60 minutes an hour and 24 hours a day." September 20th, 1944. Near the town of Arracourt in northeastern France. This would become one of the largest tank battles on the Western Front and Charles Carpenter's longest, most dangerous mission of the war. The Germans were desperate. The Allied advance through France had been relentless since D-Day, and Hitler ordered a massive counteroffensive. The German 5th Panzer Army, hundreds of tanks, including Panthers and Tiger the Heavies, launched a surprise attack against American positions. The 4th Armored Division's Combat Command suddenly found itself under assault. German tanks were everywhere, advancing through fog so thick that American artillery spotters couldn't see where to direct fire support units were pinned down, trapped, in danger of being overrun. Carpenter got the call and climbed into Rosie the Rocketer. He took off into the fog, circling above the battlefield, straining his eyes to see through the gray mist below. For hours, he saw nothing but clouds. German tanks were down there somewhere, smashing through American lines, but he couldn't find them. Then, around noon, the fog began to lift. Carpenter spotted them, a company of German Panther tanks and armored cars, advancing in formation toward Arracourt. Dozens of them. Their guns were firing, American troops were falling back. This was the moment. This was why he had put 6 bazookas on his plane. Carpenter pushed the stick forward and dove. German infantry below saw him coming and opened fire with everything they had: rifles, machine guns, anti-aircraft weapons. Tracers streaked past his wings. The fabric of his plane rippled in the slipstream. And Carpenter, flying barely faster than a car on a highway, aimed his tiny plane at 30-ton steel monsters and flipped the switches. 6 rockets streaked downward, trailing smoke. Explosions erupted below. A Panther tank jerked to a stop, its track blown off. An armored car burst into flames. Carpenter banked hard, skimming over treetops, tracers chasing him. He made it back to base, landed, and immediately ordered his plane reloaded. He flew 2 more sorties that afternoon, 2 more dives into the hell of German anti-aircraft fire, 2 more attacks that scattered and confused the German formation. By the time the sun set, Carpenter had fired 16 bazooka rockets at the enemy. The official report credited him with immobilizing 2 Panther tanks and several armored vehicles, killing or wounding more than a dozen German soldiers. More importantly, his attacks forced the remaining German tanks to retreat. The Panther formation broke off its assault, and a trapped American water point support crew, men who had watched Carpenter's attack with amazed disbelief, managed to escape capture and certain death. One of those men later said he'd never seen anything like it. A plane the size of a station wagon attacking some of the most powerful tanks in the German army. It was suicide. It was brilliant. It was Charles Carpenter. After that mission, the German army changed its tactics. Tank commanders, who had previously ignored slow-moving L-4 observation planes, now ordered their gunners to shoot at them on sight. Word had spread. Watch out for Cubs with bazookas. Carpenter told a Stars and Stripes correspondent, "The word must be getting around to watch out for Cubs with bazookas on them. Every time I show up now, they shoot with everything they have. They never used to bother Cubs. Bazookas must be bothering them a bit." That was Carpenter's style, understated. Dry humor. But behind the modesty was a man who had just fundamentally changed how the enemy viewed American reconnaissance aircraft. Over the following months, Charles Carpenter continued his one-man war against German armor. After Arracourt, he upgraded to M9 bazookas, which fired more powerful M6A3 high-explosive anti-tank rounds. These warheads could penetrate more armor and were more reliable than the earlier models. He flew mission after mission, diving on enemy tanks, supply convoys, and fortified positions. On one flight, German infantry with machine pistols opened fire on him as he banked around a tree to line up a shot. Bullets punched through the fabric of his wings, but Carpenter escaped behind another tree and flew back to base with 9mm holes in his aircraft. He didn't just fight from the air. On one occasion, Carpenter landed to scout potential landing fields for other pilots. While on the ground, German infantry ambushed his position. Carpenter jumped onto a nearby Sherman tank, grabbed the .50 caliber machine gun, and began firing at the enemy while directing American troops in a counterattack. For almost an hour, he coordinated tank fire and machine gun fire against a superior number of German soldiers until they were forced to retreat. In the chaos of that ground battle, Carpenter accidentally fired at an Allied bulldozer tank, blowing off its blade. He was immediately placed under arrest and threatened with execution by firing squad. His commanding officer fought the charges, and they were eventually dismissed, but it showed that even heroes can make mistakes in the fog of war. By the war's end, the official record credited Major Charles Carpenter with 6 tanks destroyed, including 2 Tiger WWII heavy tanks. Unofficial accounts and eyewitness reports suggest the number was closer to 14 tanks immobilized or destroyed, along with numerous armored cars and other vehicles. 6 or 14, either way, it was an extraordinary achievement. No other pilot had ever done what Carpenter had done, turning an unarmed observation plane into a tank destroyer. The press loved him. Liberty magazine called him a legend in an outfit where reckless bravery is commonplace. He earned nicknames: Bazooka Charlie, the Mad Major, and because he never received so much as a scratch from enemy fire, the Lucky Major. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel. He was awarded the Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Bronze Star, and the Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster. He flew as the personal pilot for General John S. Wood, commanding officer of the 4th Armored Division. And through it all, Carpenter maintained his simple philosophy: attack, attack, and then attack again. But war takes a toll, even on the luckiest of men. In 1945, as the war in Europe was winding down, Charles Carpenter became seriously ill. Doctors diagnosed him with Hodgkin's disease, a form of lymphoma. They gave him 2 years to live. In 1946, he received an honorable discharge from the United States Army. The farmer's son, the history teacher, the legendary tank hunting pilot, came home to Illinois. He returned to his wife, to his old job teaching history at Urbana High School. The war was over. The adventure was over. Now he faced the hardest battle of his life: surviving. But Charles Carpenter was not a man who gave up easily. Despite the diagnosis, despite the doctor's predictions, he lived. He taught history to teenagers for another 20 years. He rarely talked about the war. His daughter, who was born after he returned home, later said she knew almost nothing about her father's exploits growing up. He had moved on emotionally, she recalled. I think he came back from the war shattered. He was a great man of peace. To be called Bazooka Charlie and all these war monikers is not who I knew as my father. That's the truth about war heroes. The newspapers and magazines told stories of fearless attacks and daring missions. But the man who came home was different from the man who left. He had seen too much, done too much, lost too much. Charles Carpenter died on March 22, 1966, at the age of 53, 20 years after doctors said he had 2 years left. Even cancer couldn't take him down easily. He left behind a legacy that few people remember today. No monuments, no big ceremonies, Just the memory of a farm boy from Illinois who refused to be a passive observer while men were dying today, Rosie the Rocketer still exists. Carpenter's L-4 Grasshopper, serial number 43-30426, was discovered in Austria in 2017. It was brought back to the United States in 2019 and has been restored to flying condition. You can still see it at air shows, this tiny fabric-covered plane that once terrified German tank crews. Charles Carpenter's story is a reminder that heroism doesn't always come in the form we expect. It's not always the biggest gun or the fastest plane. Sometimes it's a history teacher from rural Illinois with a crazy idea and the courage to try it. He took an unarmed reconnaissance plane and turned it into a weapon that changed how wars are fought. He saved lives. He destroyed enemy armor that would have killed American soldiers. And he did it all in a plane that shouldn't have been anywhere near a battlefield. The military never officially adopted Carpenter's modifications. The L-4 was never meant to be a combat aircraft, and his bazooka setup remained a personal project, the innovation of one man who refused to accept limitations. But for the soldiers of the 4th Armored Division, who saw him dive through enemy fire, for the men whose lives he saved, Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter was exactly what they needed. Proof that American ingenuity, courage, and a refusal to quit could overcome even the most powerful enemy. A farmer's son who lost everything in the Depression and earned it all back in the skies over France. A teacher who taught his students about history, then went out and made history himself. A pilot who hunted tanks from a plane made of fabric and wood. This was Charles Carpenter. This was Bazooka Charlie. And this was his war. Thanks for watching this documentary about Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter, the farm boy from Illinois who became one of World War II's most unlikely heroes. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from history. We dive deep into the forgotten heroes, the incredible missions, and the moments that changed the world. Drop a comment below and let me know. What do you think about Carpenter's tactics? Genius or crazy? Would you have had the courage to dive a fabric plane at a Panzer tank? I read every comment and I love hearing your thoughts.